And I negotiated cutting my time to 20 hours. And I had so many people approach me, so many working mothers, let's be real, approach me about how did I make that happen? How did I know that I could make that happen? Like, slowly, could I repeat the words that I said in order to convince her to let me make this transition? And I kept getting these requests.
I am delighted to welcome my guest, Suzanne Brown, today. Suzanne is a work-life balance speaker, consultant, and award-winning author and founder of Mompowerment. She helps companies and working moms to create great work-life balance. Welcome to the show, Suzanne.
I am so glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Karin.
Thank you very, very much, Suzanne, for being a guest on my show. And now for our listeners from all around the world, could you share with them, where are you calling in from? And is there a particular food or site in your area?
So I am tuning in and calling in from Austin, Texas. And we are known here for a few things, especially barbecue and breakfast tacos, which are essentially a tortilla with egg and like sausage and cheese or bacon and cheese or all kinds of other combinations. But that is those are the two things that I think we are often recognized for when it comes to food. And then we're really well known for green space when it comes to what are the things that you can do in Austin. So we have a lot of places where you can hike and explore, and it's great.
That sounds wonderful. I've said this before, but I think one day I'd love to go all around, visit all the people who were on my show to see all these beautiful places that, my guests have talked about.
You've had people from all over the place, so that would take you a while.
You're absolutely right. This could be, my, 5-year, 10-year plan.
It can be part of your bucket list to go visit everyone. So there you go.
That's a good idea. So, Suzanne, could you please share with our listeners why you started Mompowerment, please?
So it really came from my noticing that there was a gap in the marketplace. So after being in the workforce for about 11 years and working for really big companies, I became a mom, and our older son was born 10 weeks premature. And I didn't really know what life was going to be like after we left the neonatal ICU, the NICU. And so I went back to my manager. And at that point, I was working for the head of finance in the company. And I negotiated cutting my time to 20 hours. And I had so many people approach me, so many working mothers, let's be real, approach me about how did I make that happen? How did I know that I could make that happen? Like, slowly, could I repeat the words that I said in order to convince her to let me make this transition? And I kept getting these requests. And about a year later, I was laid off. And I had been working, I had a side gig for, at that point, almost 8 years. And so I said, you know what, this is going to be my main thing. And I continued to get these questions about how did I transition to part-time? And then there were more questions about, can you get everything done in less than 40 hours a week? How do you continue to build your business? Like, all of these questions, but it was really about working in this part-time way and successfully transitioning to working part-time. And the questions didn't ever stop. And so when I tried to send people somewhere, I couldn't find a resource. And so, being an entrepreneur at that moment, I said, well, how hard can it be? I can just create this myself. It's always harder than you think it's going to be. And essentially, the whole idea of interviewing other women started. And eventually I figured out I needed a book based on their input. But it was really all because there was this gap. There just wasn't something in the marketplace where I could send people. And so I created it. And then the whole idea of Mompowerment evolved over time, because once I put out this book on how do you successfully transition to a part-time role, I started getting questions about, okay, well, what about work-life balance in general for working mothers? And then came companies knocking and saying, hey, could you give us some advice on how can we talk to working mothers? How can we be better supporters and allies? And how can we become a more balanced, friendly place so that we are able to attract and retain talent? And so it's all kind of evolved over time.
Wow, this is just amazing. And, let's go back to your book. I'd love to, if you could share more about the book and, the interviews you were mentioning with professional part-time working moms.
So I interviewed more than 110 professional part-time working moms to talk about, and I should mention, they're in all kinds of different industries, roles, different parts of the US. So it is a US-centric book. But the idea was that over the course of 3 years, so yes, it took me 3 years to do these interviews, I wanted to have a lot of different voices, because I didn't want somebody to pick up the book and say, oh yeah, if I worked in Austin, Texas, which is a very entrepreneur-friendly environment, and if I had more than a decade of experience, like I didn't want somebody to take that and say, well, you have such a specific set of skills and circumstance. Yeah, of course you're able to do this. It's like, no. I have voices from all kinds of different industries, all kinds of different roles. And the idea was that I wanted to amplify other women's stories, right? To be able to share lots of different tidbits of advice and insights and tips, so that anyone who picked up the book who was interested in this successful transition to a part-time role would be able to find something that they could take and use. So the idea is to have practical tips and advice so that they can literally turn around and start using it tomorrow. Then I mimic that in the second book. So I used more or less the same group of interviews. I removed some, I added others. And again, it's all about practical tips, because I mean, realistically, most professionals, I mean, especially working moms and dads, don't have the time to read a theoretical book and then say, how can I apply that in my life? Like, they need practical tips that they can take and actually use now, or make some minor adjustments and start to integrate into their lives now. So that's why I wanted it to be all about practical information.
That is such an excellent idea to help people all around who have the same idea, and as you said, but don't have the time to do their own research. And so I will be sure to put the links to your books in the show notes so that anybody listening to us can find your books.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
You're very, very welcome. So what I'm curious about is now, when you reflect back on all the interviews you did over the 3 years, what was sort of the most surprising aspect from all of these interviews?
I was able to get something that I could use in pretty much every interview that I did. So that was incredibly surprising to begin with. But when it came to what did I find surprising that I could share, there were two things. One was the number one tip that I heard was to network. The number one piece of advice, because if you think about it, you're able to tell people what it is that you want. You are also able to go and look for these roles that actually meet what it is that you're interested in. And that can be internal or external to your organization. But it can also mean creating allies within your network, or finding sponsors or mentors. And so I thought that was a really important piece of information. And then the second one was another piece of advice, but it was about, what do you do at home? And that was this whole idea of meal planning and prep. I had never thought about, honestly, how much time does it take to honestly to feed your family. And as someone who wasn't necessarily the most efficient about doing it, it didn't occur to me how much time I could save until I started having these conversations. And then I realized, wow, was I wasting time? And so I always talk about that side of things, the home side of things, because it really does take a lot of time.
Wow, that is so interesting, and you're absolutely right. I reflect back on, when you say that, the cooking aspect, crock pots and and things like that. And yes, and becoming more efficient by, cooking multiple meals all at once.
Yes. I mean, it's amazing. But I also think, throughout this whole experience, it really is the fact that I think not enough people share what works. So you assume, oh, okay, well, I know this, so everybody knows this. And really, other people don't. Like we all need to get so much better about sharing the things that work in our lives so that others can understand, and maybe they don't do it exactly the same way that you do. Maybe they take a piece of it, or maybe they take all of it, whatever it is, but let them decide how much of it that they take, instead of you saying, oh, well, I'm sure everybody knows this. I think that so many people would get great ideas that really can make things happen and can help them be more efficient and effective in their lives if more people shared, working mothers and just people in general.
I think that's such a good idea. I remember when my children were younger, we would literally, like a restaurant, we would have a meal plan for the week. So if the kids, like for the dinner, so they could look up and say, oh, tomorrow it's pizza day or something. So it was, and it also made it easier if maybe one of the children didn't like in particular something or really liked something, they could mentally prepare that their favorite dish is coming today versus tomorrow.
Yeah. I love that though. I love that. And I will say my kids did a cooking camp this summer. Oh. And so they have started to integrate their own ideas of, well, I can cook this. And so that has been really interesting to see. Although I will confess, I have turned over the meal planning and prep to my husband, largely because of an aha moment that I had during an interview where a mom talked about sharing the mental load. And so when she talked about that, I realized that I had not really shared the mental load because I had asked my husband to cook, but I still did all of the planning and the prep. And so it was saving me very little time. And when she talked about this whole concept of the mental load, I think I literally hung up the phone and immediately went to him and said, feeding our family is 100% yours. I'm not doing any of it anymore. It is your responsibility now. And so my husband and my boys get to have conversations about food, which is really fun to watch. As someone who enjoys cooking, but doesn't have to do it anymore on a regular basis.
That's perfect. That's excellent. Yes. Now, Suzanne, you have supported professionals and companies to create better work-life balance for so many years. And so what I'm curious about is, when you look back from when you started and over the years and now looking at the pandemic. And so what have you noticed? What changes have you seen during the pandemic?
One of the benefits of the pandemic, and there are a few, is that flexibility has really been put into the spotlight, right? And in addition, the pandemic compressed the timeline for companies embracing things like remote work and flexibility in general. And so that's one piece. And then I think the other thing is that the pandemic really kind of pulled back the curtain on what is it like to be a working mother, right? What are the challenges that women are facing when they have a family? Because they are definitely still taking on more of the workload at home, right? And so I think that the pandemic has created this environment where flexibility is definitely more acceptable, and they are embracing it. They are being more creative with what flexibility can look like. It is not just remote work, and it is because it's also time freedom, right? Like I think that is something that is becoming more and more common to understand. It's not simply that you get to work somewhere else, it's when you get to work, right? So that you're just not in these back to back to back to back to back to back meetings where you have to work not during work hours, right? Where you actually have to get your work done. And then I think the final thing is that working dads are actually finally talking about things related to flexibility. That was definitely not a conversation 5 years ago, like not even a little bit. And so I think these are some of the good things that have happened because of the pandemic. I think it would have taken many years for these changes to happen without something like a pandemic to be a catalyst.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree. When you look at the percentage of people working remote, right, before and after the pandemic, and how fast it happened, like literally overnight, because there was no choice really.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I heard a statistic recently that talked about, at least in the US, only about 50% of workers can work from home. But you're still talking about 50%, right? Like that is a really big number. And so being able to create flexibility and understanding how to support those people who are in flexible roles, doing flexible work, it becomes the real question, right? Like, how can you ensure that they're successful and really able to be their most productive and really able to create the same caliber of work because they're doing it, but you want to support them as much as possible instead of making the stress be on the worker doing all of that, right? Like figuring it out. It's like, how can you as an employer create a supportive environment?
That's so important. And, now as we're talking about the pandemic, and so looking at the future of work, where do you see we're going to be in like 5 or 10 years from now?
So I am very excited to be able to say that I do not think flexibility is going away. So many companies have called employees back to the office. But the interesting thing is, this isn't only about working moms and dads, because younger generations who honestly will become decision makers sooner than we think are going to, they have a focus on flexibility. They have a focus on work-life balance and on things like mental health. And so that is not going to go away anytime soon. And for that matter, even if there are economic challenges and potentially a recession or something like that, I always say the best workers that you have, the workers that have the skill set that's most sought after, they can literally find roles regardless of what's going on in the economy, right? Like that doesn't ever go away. And so if flexibility is important to them, they will find another company that provides flexibility if you decide not to anymore. And so then it's not necessarily about all of your employees, but it's about keeping the best employees. But even still, these younger generations, they still want these flexible work options. And I think the thing that's so exciting about younger generations really caring about this is they are absolutely comfortable with technology. And so they are able to bring technology into creating more of these flexible work opportunities and work environments. And so that is only going to make things like collaboration or when and how you work even easier, right? Like they are going to be able to support that in different ways and ways that we're not even thinking about now. Then I think the other piece is that things like mental health have become more mainstream. 5 years ago, it was still like, I need to talk to a mental health provider. It was like a hush hush conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And now it is so much more common to have these conversations in the open. And so I think that companies are going to embrace this idea of overall well-being for their employees. And that is, that will include things like mental health and financial health. And so it's just going to become a more holistic approach versus we're here to pay you a salary. We're here to give you benefits. It will become just this more integrated approach to well-being, which is exciting.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, you just mentioned sort of working from anywhere and being flexible. And it brings me to my next question. And I just had to ask you, because when I was doing my research for you, I saw that you have traveled 40 countries. And I'm just, I love traveling, especially before the pandemic. and so I'm curious, what transferable skills do you feel you have learned from traveling to so many different countries and exploring so many different cultures?
So I think there are two that I would say have really helped me and that I've really been able to use in my professional life. The first is the importance of communication. It happens that I speak more than one language. And so communication has really helped me talk to people in their own words, literally, right? Like in a language that they understand. But I think that even beyond that is finding a way to communicate across cultures. And cultures can be from one country to the next, but they can also be from one department to the next. Let's be honest, right? Like you can have one department that is incredibly technical and the other one that is more free flowing. And it's like, how can you be a bridge between those two groups? And that as a skill is incredibly important. And to be quite honest, very rare, right? So that element of communication and understanding, being culturally aware or understanding different customs. And again, that can be across departments, that can be from a company to its suppliers, from a company to its clients, that can take a lot of different forms. And then the second one is the idea of curiosity and judgment don't generally live in the same person. So if you can show curiosity, if you can get people to talk more, and not in a, what do you mean by that kind of way, but tell me more what you mean when you talk about XYZ piece, like questions like tell me more or follow-up questions. I think that can bring people out of their shell, or it can keep people from going on the defensive. And it can really create that those connections, which very much improve a relationship with your colleagues or with your clients. If you can create connection, then everything is going to be easier. Yeah. It makes a huge difference. And so that curiosity, I think, makes people realize, okay, this person isn't judging me. They're curious. And that can really help create bonds.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And, we are coming to an end of our conversation, but I wanted to make sure, is there anything that we haven't touched upon that you would like to share with our audience today?
So I want to share two different things. One is from the employer perspective, and one is from any employees who might be looking for more flexibility. So as an employer, as a manager, as a senior leader, as an HR professional, you might be listening to this and saying, okay, great. She's talking about flexibility. It's something I need to think about in the future. How do I know what flexibility means to my employees? Ask the question. And not only ask it in several different ways. It might not be that you say to somebody, what would you like when it comes to a flexible work solution, right? Like sometimes that somebody might respond to that just and give you their opinion. Other times they might say, I'm fine. I'm good. This is what I've got is fine. And so being able to ask that question a few different ways in a few different places, it might be that you ask through surveys. It might be that you ask through what we'll call influencers within your organization. So within a department or within a team, there are so often those people who aren't necessarily the leader or the manager, but they definitely they're tapped into the feel of the team. They're absolutely aware of the pulse of everything that's going on, right? So being able to talk to those people about what are people talking to you about? What are our employees struggling with, and being able to have senior leaders have an open door and provide access to employees to come and talk to them, so that they can give that information directly to their manager, senior leader, or whoever. And I think part of that in general, also, you're going to get more honest answers if you can also be honest to begin with, right? Like you want to be the role model for other people. So you can say, I struggle with starting things off in the morning, or whatever it is that you struggle with as a leader, so that people can give you that feedback and won't feel, again, judged, right? Like we talked about earlier. And then on the flip side, if you are an employee who is looking for more flexibility, to be able to ask for what you need, it's really helpful if you think about creating win-win scenarios. So it's not simply, I want to work from home. It's, I want to work from home. Here's what you get out of it as my employer, right? Like you want to have these strategic conversations where everyone is getting a win, or as many parts get a win, because then it's more likely to happen than if you go in and you just demand, this is what I want, and then that's it. So I wanted to leave those two thoughts for anyone who's listening.
These are wonderful, suggestions, and really practical and so helpful. So I really appreciate that. And now, Suzanne, how can people find you on social media?
So I am active on LinkedIn, which is where we met. I am also on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. So I'm on all the platforms. I'm Mompowerment everywhere. You can look up Mompowerment on LinkedIn, and so and then you can always go to mompowerment.com.
Great, and I also will be sure to put all of these links into the show notes so people can find them there as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, for this really, really helpful and very practical advice conversation with me today. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm thrilled to have had this conversation, and I so appreciate you inviting me on.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the show. We hope you gained valuable insights and new ideas. To keep listening to future episodes, please head over to iTunes or your favorite player and subscribe and give it a rating. We would very much appreciate a review and for you to share it on social media, so more people can start innovating in how they offer employment. Until the next time, goodbye.